When you go to a QME, they are legally obligated to address any and all body parts or injuries that are claimed on one or more claim forms. A big problem I see with people going to QMEs and not really understanding that responsibility is that they'll say, you know what, QME, I hurt my back, my neck, and the shoulder. And the QME says, sorry, I'm only here to evaluate your back. And that is a big problem in workers' comp. The QME will often limit the scope of the evaluation artificially beyond what the injuries are actually supposed to be.
Let's talk about, Bilal, what happens if you already messed up. Like, oops, I already did one of these things. What, as an attorney, as someone who does this, what would you tell a client that has missed a deadline or gotten the wrong doctor? Like, please guide us. What happens?
So, starting the QME process itself is pretty forgiving, depending on the situation you're in. Of course, you can certainly waive your right to a QME if you wait too long. So, potentially you could be in a situation where you either waited too long or you're not using the right objection or process to request your QME. But for the most part, getting the process together is pretty straightforward and fairly forgiving. The medical record side is always important. When the carrier has a QME evaluation scheduled, it is their legal responsibility to provide any and all relevant medical records to the evaluator. It is not the injured worker's responsibility. So remember that. The injured worker can provide medical records to the QME, but they are not required to. And so to some extent, you can rely on the fact that the QME should get all the records from the insurance company. So I'm just saying that so you guys don't have to stress out about wondering, hey, I've been to 50 different doctors over the last 3 years. How is it that I know how to get everything? How am I going to do that? Where am I going to go to get the records? Who do I talk to? What if I miss something? It's the carrier's responsibility, and they should have everything. And not only that, but when the QME gets the records, they should be provided what's called a medical record index, which is an outline of everything that's provided to the QME. And that's something that you can ask for from the insurance carrier themselves, and they should be able to provide that to you. And so that outline, that index will list basically anything and everything that was provided to the QME, which is important for you to look at because you may realize looking at that they've missed half of your doctors. Or, you've had diagnostic studies like EMGs or MRIs that are incredibly important to the issues in your case. And so you do want to make sure that everything that's relevant should be provided and is provided to the QME before you actually get there. I'm sure there's people here. I know I've come across this in multiple cases where QME sees our client afterwards. They said, hey, I never got any medical records. And that's obviously a big problem because ultimately the QME can't do what they need to do without your medical history. And so to the extent possible before your evaluation, assuming you're on your own, you pick the greatest doctor possible and you don't need help or anything, I hope, at least do that. Make sure they've got all the medical records ahead of time.
Yeah.
To the extent they don't, you can clean things up with what's called a supplemental report, meaning asking the doctor after the evaluation to review additional materials, whether it's a job description, a medical report, a consult evaluation report, a post-operative surgical report, whatever it is. Those can be provided to the QME and have the QME weigh in after the fact. Of course, the sooner the better. You don't want to have something done, have an evaluation and then wait 3 years to try and ask the QME to comment on it. Obviously, the QME.
I love how you said wait 3 years.
Well, sometimes, people don't know how to handle the situation. They just get the QME report and think it is what it is, unfortunately. But, you do have to kind of act expeditiously when you get these reports that may be missing information because sometimes the QME won't say, hey, I'm missing X, Y, and Z. They'll just write the report with what they got and based on the evaluation of you. And to the extent they have an incorrect medical history or they're missing documents, that may not be something that either they pick up on or care to address. And so you may be left out and left behind because you didn't ensure that those things were actually provided to the doctor for the evaluation.
Right. And just in a general idea for those of you guys that are on the webinar live right now with us, this is only one specific part of a workers' comp claim. So there is a monstrosity of other things that happen, delays that happen, mistakes that can happen, which is why I'm always just surprised, shocked how people are willing to you know what? I'm just going to tackle and tough this up on my own and figure it out all while I'm getting better, all while I'm recovering and trying to focus on getting back to work or getting back to as much as possible as I can as I was prior to the injury or the illness, right? It's a lot of back and forth calling. It's a lot of documentation that you also have to get. Hint, hint, get a free consultation. Join an amazing team that is going to do all of that for you in the back end so that all you can do and focus on is truly your body, your pain, not to be stressed, and to know that you're doing the things right, having that peace of mind. I don't care what anything charges, just to know that I don't have to deal with this waking me up in the middle of the night. Bet your butt I would do it 100%. Again, this is just one section of what a workers' comp claim can potentially go into, right? Not all of them. There's some really easy ones that kind of navigate through the system, right, Bilal, that they're just in and out. Everything runs smoothly. But it's when these things get complicated and when things start seeing off that you need to get legal help. How often would you say on a case, Bilal, that you are representing, does the insurance company have their own attorney handling their stuff?
Ooh, that's a really good question. I would say more often than not, and it usually just depends on when. Typically, there are some adjusters who are career adjusters. They've been at the same insurance company for 30 plus years. They've been doing this long enough. Quite frankly, a lot of times they may know as much as I do,
Mm-hmm.
because they've dedicated their entire career to it. And they've done a really good job of learning and understanding the laws and applying them day in, day out. So they know what they're doing, right?
Right.
There's other adjusters, and I would say most adjusters who do not handle claims themselves and say, the large majority of cases are handled by defense attorneys, either what we call in-house counsel, meaning the legal department of the insurance company that hires lawyers internally, or it's
Mm-hmm.
referred out to private defense firms who specialize in workers' compensation.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. So we've made a scenario of a case story that maybe you could share with us, Bilal. But I think overall, it's really important for people to know, don't wait until you get that response, or don't wait until you get that letter, or for things to get worse to take an action on what truly is your right. So I was wondering if I could pick your brain, Bilal, and you can share a story where someone was about to choose the wrong doctor. I'm pretty sure you have plenty of those stories that we would love to hear, so that we know we are dealing with this and it does happen and you've handled it before.
Yeah, of course. So there are loopholes to get out of a bad QME, provided you haven't actually gone to the QME evaluation yet. So if you've got a QME panel, you've already gone down that process, but you haven't actually been to the evaluation, even if it's scheduled, you can still technically get out of the evaluation by virtue of the fact that you're hiring a lawyer. Lawyer gets to say that this panel was requested while this person did not have a lawyer, and therefore they get a replacement panel, just
Mm-hmm.
by default. So if you already got a panel and you're nervous about it, and you're not sure, and you want help, and you change your mind, we can still help you and get away from that bad QME. Uh,
Woohoo!
and so there are a lot of clients who call us because they get this QME in the mail, either because they requested it or because the insurance did, and they panic and they're not sure what to do. And so they'll call us and say, hey, I got this QME, how do I get out of it? And we say, great, we've got you, right? If you sign up with us or any other law firm for that matter, the lawyer gets to say this panel is invalid and start the process again, which gives you a fresh shot. One story in particular, there was a client who came to us who got their QME panel, and I won't name names for the evaluator. I'm not here to badmouth them per se. But I had known this evaluator from other cases. They were a former director for what at the time was US HealthWorks, which is now Concentra. They acquired them for several $100 million in a transaction a few years ago. And Concentra, formerly US HealthWorks, is the biggest industrial workers' comp medical provider for workers' compensation cases here in California. They're the preferred provider for obvious reasons that, and I say preferred provider, talking about the insurance company, not injured workers. But their former director is also a licensed QME evaluator and happened to be on this woman's panel. Luckily she came to us in time where I could get a new panel, because there was a high likelihood she would have gone to see this evaluator who would have tanked her case 100%. And I know that because I've deposed this QME before. I've cross-examined him under oath. I've questioned him by writing requests for supplemental reports, and he is a firm insurance company believer.
Wow.
He's on their side, and so I helped her dodge a bullet, which was great for her, great for the
Right.
case.
Of course. Okay. Okay. That's good. Thank you for sharing that story with us. Um, we have another case scenario that we've put up, and I'm pretty sure you have a story to share about this. Can you share a case story where there was missing history medical records? Which, by the way, when you hire an attorney, and correct me if I'm wrong, Bilal, um, as the attorneys, let's say that it's being like, for example, sometimes you request your medical records as a patient. It takes forever for them to get back to you. There's a massive people and wait line to get your records. As an attorney, you guys can just go ahead and subpoena the medical clinic to give up those medical records, right? So that kind of saves time.
Correct. Yeah, as officers of the court, us lawyers have the what's called subpoena power, meaning we can request or order that certain insurance companies, medical providers, employers provide us with records. And so we have subpoena power to request pretty much anything and everything relevant to your workers' compensation case. So, to the extent that you've been injured and you've had treatment in multiple locations and facilities, we're able to subpoena those records to provide them to the QME or for whatever other reason we'd use them in your workers' compensation case. At no cost to you, no stress to you either. All you have to do is tell us where you've been, and we'll go out and get all the records on your behalf without any problems.
Is that faster than if I go do it on my own?
I would like to say yes, but it,
Keeping it honest. Okay,
but
okay, fair enough.
no. I just had this example, to be honest. A client of mine, we're trying to settle her medical care, and we need to do what's called a Medicare set aside. It's a special thing. I won't go into the details about it here, but part of doing this is we need to gather her medical treatment records for the last 2 years. My client had been to a Walgreens pharmacy to fill all her medications, and to get these medical records from her pharmacy, in order to subpoena them, we have to serve Walgreens corporate office and go through their
Oh,
legal department and blah, 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 right? So it is a long process. Whereas I talked to my client, I said, look, client, this is going to take a long time for us. We'll do it. It'll be thorough. It'll be comprehensive, but we'll get everything. Or how close do you live to your pharmacy? Oh, I live 5 minutes. I was going to go there tomorrow anyways. Cool. Can you please ask your pharmacist for a printout of all your medications from the last 2 years? Yeah, no problem. Okay. She able to get that to me in like a week. So,
nice.
in some circumstances that can be easier.
Mm-hmm.
Depending if it's employment records, for example, your wage and hour records, or if you're fighting a wrongful term case or discrimination case, the subpoena is not the same as you simply requesting your records, because when the subpoena goes out, the record keeper, the facility, has to certify under oath that they provided all of the records they have. And to the extent they do not, or they're hiding things, they can get in serious trouble, either for perjury, or they
Yeah.
can have certain documents limited or excluded from trial or being provided to a QME because they didn't comply honestly with our subpoena. So, the subpoena sometimes could take longer, but it also is more thorough and it has legal repercussions too.
Right.
So, depending on what's going on in the case, a subpoena is certainly something that is a powerful tool to help you and just to ensure compliance and to make sure that you're getting everything from wherever you're looking.
Right. Well, I can fairly tell you these two clients of yours took a very important step, and that was hiring an attorney to take care of some of the stuff. So, again, each of these stories that you shared, thank you so much. They share this practical step, an important step for them to be able to successfully navigate the system. Which, by the way, we're going to show you guys the QR code on the screen. I would highly recommend that if you have specific questions regarding your case, because every case is different. So you can also call in if you don't want to do a video call. You can also call the office and the phone number that's going to be on the screen as well. And that way you guys can schedule a call with one of our experts who will lovely and happily guide you through the entire process as far as what your options are and come up with a strategy more than anything that is going to help you navigate the system in an effective way. So finally, the Q&A session is here. I do want to encourage everyone to just go ahead on the comments below. We can see them here as well. Definitely going to answer these Q&A for you. So we also have the final 4 steps for you to just make sure you sign up for the emails with us as well, so you get that checklist. We have an ebook that talks about kind of like what the entire workers' comp flow looks like. It does have a lot of tips in it as well. We can provide that for you. But Bilal, let's ask the listeners or people who are watching if they have any questions to post on the chat. I do see Jesucito was on here. And he was very active. It looks like he actually went to a doctor's appointment, but he probably connected with our team. So if you have questions for us in regards to workers' comp, please let us know, and we'll be happy to answer some of those questions. While we wait for these questions, Bilal, is there anything else you would like to share regarding QMEs that we did not share in this webinar that's important?
Yeah, I think, well, I kind of touched on this a little bit earlier. The QME is really important in your case. And you have to understand that the QMEs have responsibilities, just like any other doctor. And you have to understand what these responsibilities are and how important they are to your case when you're going to the evaluation. A lot of those regarding, having to review comprehensive medical records. Also, the biggest one I see is having to address all the body parts. When you go to a QME, they are legally obligated to address any and all body parts or injuries that are claimed on one or more claim forms. So, a big problem I see with people going to QMEs and not really understanding that responsibility is that they'll say, you know what, QME, I hurt my back, my neck, and the shoulder. And the QME says, sorry, I'm only here to evaluate your back. And that is a big problem in workers' comp. The QME will often limit the scope of the evaluation artificially beyond what the injuries are actually supposed to be. So, you really want to be able to understand these laws so that you can not only advocate for yourself, but also to hold the QME accountable and to find these issues and mistakes that happen throughout the evaluation process, so that if you're doing this on your own, you can point them out to a judge. Or if you have an attorney, you can work with the attorney to ensure that these things are taken care of and addressed in a timely manner that will actually help out your case. So, I think understanding what the QME's role is, why it's so important, and what their actual responsibilities are, which, I think it's probably a longer conversation we have time for today to actually go through each and everything a QME is supposed to do. But really, I think that's why it's, important to also potentially consult with a lawyer if you're at this point in the process to understand what's going to happen and how you hold the QME accountable when you get there.
Got it. Yeah, that's super, super important. Okay. Well, it doesn't seem like we have any questions coming in at the moment, but I do have questions that we have had throughout the entire process of our podcast that I would like to share. And one of those questions says, what if I already went through my QME process and I have a percentage? Am I screwed?
I mean, yes and no. It depends. Really, if the QME gave you a fair rating, then it is what it is. A lot of times people do go down the QME route by themselves and they get an okay QME. And they get a rating that is reasonably accurate. The QMEs use something called the AMA Guides for Rating Impairment, which are basically a big green book that tells you essentially what percentage of impairment you have for certain body parts or conditions or functional limitations. And the QME is supposed to use the AMA Guides in order to rate your impairment as accurately as possible. So they may say, hey, you've had total knee replacement, so you have X percentage of disability, or you have this percentage lack of range of motion in your shoulder following surgery, so now you have this impairment. And our job is really to ensure that the QME is giving you the best rating possible using the AMA Guides for actually rating impairment. So, I'd say in that particular case, it depends on whether or not we feel like the QME did an adequate job in addressing your impairment, whether we feel like they addressed all the body parts that they needed to, or in fact, whether they addressed the impairment too early. Impairment's supposed to be addressed at the end of a case once you've medically plateaued, meaning that you're not going to get any better. So if you have a pending surgery that's going to be a big deal and they said you have a disability rating already, go back to work, you're done, it might be premature. So we have to look at a lot of different factors in addressing that. It's certainly not the end of the case, depending on what's going on, but I would say it really depends on the report itself, what's going on in the case, big picture for us to say
Yeah.
whether or not you're screwed. If it's a really bad report, sometimes it can be difficult because like a lot of these QMEs, they're practicing physicians. They've been doing this a very long time. They're experts. You have an orthopedic surgeon who's done thousands of surgeries over the past 30 years. They know what they're talking about medically. And so to the extent they write a bad report and they're out to get you, it can be very difficult to undo that. They know how to explain themselves. They know how to articulate their thoughts and feelings, right or wrong. And it can be very difficult to kind of read out of a bad position with a bad QME. Not
Yeah.
impossible, but it depends.
Right. Okay. So it looks like Karen wrote in a question. It says, I thought things were going well, if very slowly. QME says report too thin to support the QME's ratings, which is weird because the employer already agreed. How do I hold the QME accountable? What are my options?
Yeah, so this is something pretty common, actually, Karen. Thanks for bringing this up. QMEs, there's a licensing process to become a QME. It often entails just some basic coursework on how to write a report. And that's kind of it, some, training, and then you're off to the races. There's a lot of QMEs that look at the QME evaluation process is a volume business, meaning the more QMEs I can stick into a day, the more I can get paid. There's also QMEs that just aren't good at writing reports. They write a very short report. They write a report, regarding permanent disability that's, one sentence. It just says, this person has 50% disability because they hurt their back, and that's it. There's no explanation. There's no reference to the AMA guide. So I think when you're talking about a QME report that's too thin, I'm assuming that they're perhaps articulating that one of those reports popped into the case, meaning, it's a very short report. The QME's opinions are really conclusive without a lot of justification or discussion behind them, which are things that the judge ultimately in a workers' compensation case is probably going to look for. If the QME gives an opinion about something, the QME is going to want to back it up. Although I can say with certainty, a discussion about permanent disability doesn't require all that much. They're supposed to articulate which table and section of the AMA guides they're referring to, why they gave you the impairment they did, outlining what the conditions are in the medical report to substantiate the conditions and things like that. So depending on what the issue is in the case, I could see a report being too thin if it doesn't have a really thorough discussion, although that is usually easily correctable by a request for a supplemental report. So if, for example, the QME said, hey, I think you have a rating of 25% and the standard rating is 10%, I'm going to give you the higher rating, 25%. You can write a request to a supplemental report to the QME to say, hey, QME, thanks for giving me 25%. Can you please explain why you think the higher rating is more appropriate? And so usually a request for supplemental report is the best way to kind of, clean things up. So, I would say at that point, a request for supplemental report is probably what you should do depending on what the issue is. But again, I would want to know more about what it is that they're referring to that's too thin. And oftentimes, look, adjusters will say, I disagree with this report. And it's like a kid, right? They're stomping their feet. They're, holding their breath till their face turns blue, hoping it'll kind of just go away on its own. In reality, sometimes they just don't like the report, but the report is good. So I would say don't let the adjuster necessarily shake your confidence if you're happy with the report. But again, without seeing the report, it'd be hard for me to tell you whether or not I think it's actually a solid report or not.
Got it. Okay, so we have two final questions on here. And then I do want to remind whoever's on watching the live webinar, we do have the consultation rooms available now. So if you guys want to join now and kind of dig deeper into your specific case and strategies that you can potentially take to successfully navigate the workers' comp case or claim or world or system. There's a QR code on the screen. You guys can scan that QR code. It'll take you directly into the priority line, the VIP access for the experts that are waiting for your call behind the scenes. But yeah, scan it. Get your questions in there if you don't want to share them, because it's a lot of personal information that we're, I guess, showing through this webinar on the chats. But yeah, it says right here, why would an insurance company stop sending your PPD biweekly checks after a judge findings an award when they stated they wanted to negotiate for CNR? Ooh, I've seen that question before.
So this is a pretty long, this would take me a while to answer this in a lot of detail. It's super dependent on what's going on in your case. Let's say you have a findings and award and you have a permanent disability percentage that's associated with your case. That permanent disability percentage has a monetary value attached to it if it's anything more than 0%. And the insurance company pays out your permanent disability in biweekly payments till it's all paid out. And so you may have reached a point where the percentage of permanent disability that you were awarded has been paid out to you, in which case the payments would stop. Of course, a compromise and release settlement for the remainder of your case, let's say they want to buy out your future medical care, can be negotiated anytime. So, for example, if you have a findings and award for a permanent disability as well as future medical care, whether it's 1 year, it's 2 years, or 10 years down the road, you still potentially can negotiate a settlement of your future medical care with the insurance company. So just because there's a findings and award doesn't mean that the settlement for the rest of the case is necessarily off the table. It's just where you're at in the case and whether or not they're still interested in negotiating after your findings and award that would matter. But presumably, if your permanent disability payments have stopped after an award, it means that everything they paid you or owed you is actually paid out. Usually that's the case, but without knowing more, that's the best I can give you. Hope that answered the question.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Bilal, for taking your time and answering these questions. Karen, we're just going to answer Karen's last little question. It says, following up to my previous question, would I call the QME or does the request have to come from the insurance or, yeah?
It depends on the issue. There are some things that are what we say is the applicant's burden, meaning the applicant has the burden to prove up permanent disability. They have a burden to prove injury, AOE, COE, meaning happening at work. Apportionment, which is the idea that some of your injury should be attributable to things other than your work injury, which is an insurance company favorite because it reduces the value of your case. Apportionment is the defendant's burden, the insurance company's burden. So, depending on what the issue is, you may not necessarily be the one that kind of digs your own grave, right? If the insurance company is not happy with the doctor's opinion regarding apportionment, you may not want to clear that up on your own because you're helping prove their case, for example.
Of course.
Again,
support them.
Yeah. And so the request for a supplemental report from, the QME is something that either party can do. It's a written request to the QME. Requests for supplemental reports have to be served on the opposing side. If you're providing any information to the QME, it needs to be served on the other side first. And you have to wait the certain period of time for them to object to it potentially. But yeah, you'd request a supplemental report to the QME, and it's not a state form or anything like that. Oftentimes, it's just a handwritten, not a handwritten, sorry, a type letter. Yeah, we're not in 1970 anymore. It's
I'm gonna literally just type, give me this.
I've seen it. I've seen handwritten letters to QMEs and stuff, so it's certainly possible. But yeah, depending on who the issue is favorable to, you may not want to address it. So I'd say it depends on the issue. But yeah, it's a request for supplemental report that you would do or that the insurance company would do, depending on what the issue is.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Bilal, for answering these questions. And as I mentioned earlier, we do have a podcast. And Bilal loves to jump in on the comments as well and answer these questions for you. So if you are on YouTube, make sure you follow us, Work Comp Talk Podcast. We talk about weekly subjects that are regarding the workers' comp system. And then on top of that, we also have the Pacific Workers channel, which is the law firm's channel. And we have a ton of information on there as well. You guys can
Carmen,
go.
sorry, I
Yeah,
think we do have one more question here that maybe we
sure.
missed. I just want to make sure I didn't ignore everyone here. I think this person had asked about getting the QME panel. They were sent the form, it looks like, and they were told they only have 10 days to fill out. And so the question is, I guess, what if they have an attorney? Again, the QME process can start at any time. Once you're represented, that changes. So, if you haven't done it yet, you don't necessarily have to. The attorney can do it for you. So I would say it depends on what's going on in the case. But I think this just highlights one of the other situations in workers' comp where a lot of people feel pressured in workers' comp because there are deadlines and they can affect your case in a major way.
Mm-hmm.
And these deadlines come fast. And when you're faced with situations like, well, what QME do I pick, or when do I fill out the form? If I don't fill out the form, am I waiving my right to this thing? What specialty do I pick? And you literally have sometimes only a couple days to figure it out. It can be really stressful.
Yeah.
So I'd say if you're being told you need to go to a QME by the insurance adjuster, I would just reach out to an attorney. Again, whether it's us or someone else, don't let them pressure you, and make sure, this is something we deal with all the time. So, if I get told I need to go to a QME on a case, I'm like happy and I can do it. It's no problem. I know who to pick. I know what to do. It's simple. But if you've never been through this before, it can be stressful, especially if the insurance adjuster is telling you things that you're not sure are actually legally appropriate. So,
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you so much for catching that question. I missed it. Again, once if you want to be able to get that checklist that we talked about earlier, you're definitely going to want to check out the replay on your email. If you signed up with the entire flow for the webinar, you're going to get the replay email. If you're on YouTube, please send us a comment. We'll be more than happy to send it for you as well. And yeah, don't forget that there's a lot of information coming down for you in the webinars replays as well, and the lines for you to be able to contact and hit that priority line for our intake specialists to be able to answer some of your questions specific to your case. Those are definitely going to be available even after the webinar finishes. So please feel free, if right now you can't necessarily connect with us because either you're at work, you got to get back to work, and we went over a little bit past your lunchtime, go ahead and take this with you, and you're going to get emails, and you can rewatch this on YouTube as many times as you want to go back and highlight some of the most important moments on here. But Bilal, thank you so much for joining. I appreciate the time that we've spent in this webinar, and I know we're going to do this again next month. So if you guys want us to talk specifically about something for next month's webinar, drop it in the comments and we'll try to make it happen for you. We'll catch you guys on the next Work Comp Talk webinar. And thank you. We hope you enjoy and have a good rest of your day. If you guys want to scan the QR code, it'll take you directly to the priority line bypass, and it'll connect you directly with one of our intake specialists. You can also call the office and the phone number that's going to be on the screen as well.